Welcome, and thank you for joining us here on Radically Rational, where we're bringing facts back into fashion and doing everything we can to make simple sanity sexy again. It's time for adults to take back over. So what am I doing here? I'm the occasionally juvenile, the never fashionable, but occasionally stylish Paul Alexander, and my podcast partner is the amazing Lauri Pearson, who joins us from the People's Republic of Austin. Having a good day?
Great day. Great day. Thank you for having me.
Well, you do happen to be kind of a big part of this, so thank you for being here. We appreciate that very much.
Long-time listener.
Okay, so we're all about, again, trying to get over this post-factual world by being rational. The idea is not to drain anybody's passion, but when we make rational decisions, it can enhance our passion and enhance our enjoyment of life. So those are the rules that I try to follow, and everybody does here. And if I mess up, if I violate my own rules, I will be roundly, verbally chastised by an 8-year-old girl.
Makes no sense whatsoever.
Again, thank you for joining us here on Radically Rational. What was that bit, Lauri, that Keith Olbermann used to do? The world's worst person, the worst person on earth. All right, we're going to turn this around. Am I wrong? You and I have both had conversations with the guest of this show a couple of times this week. And here, before I get to anything else or any of his other credentials, this may be the greatest human being ever born.
Seriously. Absolutely.
I know you guys had a great conversation.
We did. I didn't want to hang up. We had so many things to say. I was like, we got to save this. We got to save this for the show because I don't want to forget the questions. And I know as soon as we open dialogue, all that's going to come back. So well-informed, so articulate, and so personable. I'm really looking forward to this.
Absolutely. So this gentleman that is earning all these accolades
Yes.
is Professor Roger Barnes, one of the country's leading sociologists, the head of the sociology department at the highly respected University of the Incarnate Word in San Antonio. And first of all, thank you so much for joining us. And one of the things, Lauri knows this, one of the things we like to do on Radically Rational is we want to make sure that our questions are hyper-specific and very tightly targeted. So, Raj, how the hell did we get here as a society?
That's a good question. And Paul, Lauri, sociologists have been talking about this particularly in the last 4 years. And we've been in a period of dislocation and fragmentation, the likes of which most of us are just simply not used to. And we need to bring a little rationality and a little bit of sanity back into public discourse and analysis. How did we get here? Well, there was a French sociologist who in the 1890s coined the term anomie, and he used it in a study of suicide. And he talked about anomic suicide, and he said that this is what happens when society experiences a high level of normlessness, where the typical values and norms and sanctions that hold us in place and hold us in check and provide some regulation, those things break down. They get dislocated. And anomie, I think, is what we have been going through in the past 4 years especially. Okay, now some members of American society, poor people, migrant workers, for example, prisoners, they've been experiencing anomie almost the entirety of their life. But as a social condition of the social structure, anomie has been a pervasive experience for the United States. And so it's just not that we have an alarmingly high rate of poverty. It's not just that we have really disturbing rates where we are falling behind internationally in education, where women's wages continue to kind of stay frozen almost at the same level that they've been in for 4 decades. And so these are things that are happening to us, but at the same time, under Donald Trump, our sense of who we were and what direction we were moving in became extremely frightening. Maybe the election of Joe Biden is a little bit of evidence that we're trying to regain our sanity.
Are you optimistic about that?
I try to be.
I try to be too, but in my more pessimistic moments, I think this is 2021 going on 1521. Is that total hyperbole in the sense that we're now in a post-factual world, which is the same thing as being in a non-factual world?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you see this particularly in your business, Paul, where you're looking at, how do people communicate via media? And what do we watch? Where do we get our news? What do we consider newsworthiness? One of the things as an educator, and I'm now retired for a month from the university.
Which is great because that means now you can let it fly. You don't have to have any filter on anything now. We got you at exactly the right moment.
So, but one of the things that I always struggled with, for example, was getting my students to read a daily newspaper. And they would say, well, hey, I read the newspaper, on this thing.
Right.
Which, of course, I didn't believe at all. But, I think people have moved away from that level of factuality. The Walter Cronkites, for example, those news broadcasters? I mean, I watch MSNBC. MSNBC talks to a particular kind of audience.
No doubt.
And so does CNN, and especially Fox. Oh, my God. So
is it just a matter of you can pick your slant?
Well, yeah, I think so. I do. You can pick your slant and objectivity, a world without bias, where facts are presented. We need to get to that. In some respects, I guess we never work quite perfectly there.
Right.
But that's been challenged.
Lauri, you and I talk just as friends about this fact thing very, very frequently. And where do you stand on this, and how cynical are you about it? And are you concerned that not only are we as a society not drinking out of the same water fountain of facts, you got people now who are denying the very existence of facts and even the concept of facts? I'm going to defer to Raj here in a minute, but as far as I'm concerned, that's brand new territory. What do you think?
I think somewhere along the lines, I don't know how or what, and again, this is all just generalization, but I think somewhere along the lines, we went from being able to be objective to just completely turning it into opinion-based fact collection, and echo chamber stuff that you and I do talk a lot about. I don't know when we lost our ability to be objective, but I think that to me, that's one of the highest forms of intelligence, to say, I believe and think this based on my own experience and my own individual experience in the world, but you, having a different experience in the world, have a different opinion. Why don't you share that with me? I don't know where that went. And in a lot of places it still exists, but I think as a whole, we are told that that's gone, and we are told that we hate each other, and we're told that we're polarized. And so we all sort of are reacting from that place. But I think that there's plenty of room for correction and plenty of room for dialogue like we're having now.
No, absolutely. And as long as we're drawing different conclusions from the same set of established facts, I think that is a pretty high level of discourse. But when we just throw facts out the window,
right.
Well, there are things that, and Lauri, I understand your point. A lot of facts is point of view. For example, my view of that door is different from Raj's view of this screen over here just because of physical point of view, but there are objective facts. And Raj, what I'm hearing now, and this is new at least in my lifetime, is I'm now hearing people not only rejecting facts, rejecting the concept of facts, rejecting the existence of facts, and showing open disdain for facts and saying that anybody who's tethered to facts is a sucker. That's new.
That is new. And here's an important distinction to make, Paul, and that is you can still take a side, you can still articulate a value, you can take a political position, and I'll give you an example in just a second, and approach the topic still objectively or scientifically if you want, and you can deal with nothing but facts. So I'll give you an example, okay? I've spent almost the entirety of my adult life studying the death penalty in the United States. And this state has a wretched history of that. That's a value position for me to say that, but that's also a fact. And it really is. And we can look historically at the key markers that objectively make that so, But so you can still take positions, but you need to marshal your evidence. You need to know empirically what the dickens you're talking about, and you need not to fudge the evidence. And evidence is what a lot of is just ignored by too many people today.
That's a pretty clear, simple English declarative sentence for sure. Our guest is sociology professor Dr. Roger Barnes, and we're so grateful that he's joined us today. And you referenced your position on capital punishment in general and the Texas death penalty laws in particular. You wrote a particularly effective op-ed piece for the San Antonio Express-News. And again, yes, you drew a conclusion that ultimately is your opinion, but that opinion is fact and evidence-based. And the three things that you singled out that, in your opinion, makes the death penalty, I'll use the word irrational, would be innocence, money, and race.
Right.
Please.
Well, one of the myths, conventionally understood, that word myth, is that the death penalty doesn't make any mistakes, that we get it right in every case. The fact of the matter is we don't. We've made mistakes. We've made horrendous mistakes. Just ask Anthony Graves. I know Anthony. He spent 18 years in prison, 12 of it on death row, given a death sentence for the murder of a family that he didn't know. He was miles away from the crime when it happened. It was a Texas case. Anthony suffered for more than a decade on death row for something he didn't do. He's a totally innocent man, but he's not alone. We've had 13 innocent people exonerated from death row in Texas. Nationally, since the resumption of the death penalty in the 1970s, we've had 185, I think it is, that have walked off a death row when the evidence of their innocence has been legally established. Mm-hmm. There's something wrong with the punishment that does that. But worse than that, those are men who have been exonerated from death row. What about the people who weren't exonerated? Okay? What about the Cameron Todd Willinghams or the Reuben Cantus here in San Antonio, or the Carlos de Lunas? We probably know more about the de Luna case down in Corpus Christi than has ever been documented about any capital punishment case in American history. And thanks to Professor Joe Liebman and his law students at Columbia University, the documentation is in. And you just simply can't look at it and not come to the conclusion that it was the wrong Carlos. It was Carlos Hernandez who committed the murder, not Carlos de Luna. Carlos de Luna paid with his life. It's a tragic mistake, So you have a penalty that, first of all, catches innocent people. Secondly, it's a penalty that costs an enormous amount of money. Okay? And the costs only get higher and higher. 30 years ago, the Dallas Morning News did an examination of the first decade of executions in Texas. And they were able to go and pin the cost of those things. You look at how much a trial costs and how much it costs for appeals and the time on death row and the execution itself. And at that time, it was $2.3 million per execution in Texas. $2.3 million. Well, you just take that was a 1992 figure. Plug that into an inflation adjuster, and it turns into $4.3 million in today's money. And there's no reason to think that this whole capital sentencing process has gotten cheaper. So that's an enormous amount of money, and you don't need to spend it. We've got alternatives. And the good news here is that these alternatives are increasingly being relied upon. Prosecutors are seeking death less often than they used to. Juries are returning death sentences far less frequently than they used to. Juries are now coming back with life without parole instead of death sentences. So we're beginning to see, just a little bit of movement here that indicates a kind of coming to grips with we being the only Western industrial democracy in the world that carries out executions, and maybe even for the United States, that day needs to draw to a close. I mean, earlier this year, Virginia abolished the death. Virginia!
Right.
I got the second most executions in the modern era, and the total most executions that we've documented on a state-by-state basis, going all the way back to colonial America. And they abolished the death penalty. If Virginia can abolish, I don't see why Texas can't get around to it.
Well, maybe we're evolving and making a little progress, but there are some constants, and that is that poor people are much more likely to be executed than rich people, and people of color are much more likely to be executed than white people.
Yeah, it's, you go back a half century ago and you could really see the race differential in terms of offenders. Now, that's less clear. Whites and blacks occupy death row nationwide at about the same rate. Okay, although there's far fewer black people in the United States than there are white people. When it comes to who's more likely to get executed, the answer quite clearly there is people who kill whites are far more likely to get executed than people who kill blacks. In some states, this runs 4 to 5 times as high. And this isn't based on conjecture or superstition.
It's numbers.
It's numbers. It's based on empirical studies conducted, and much of that even presented to the United States Supreme Court in argument. And so it's laid out there, and the numbers tell a story. And that story, time and again, state after state, is that you kill a white person, you're at a far greater risk of being sentenced to death than if you kill a black person. So get this. We used to see racism rear its ugly head in terms of the race of the killer. Now we see it in terms of the race of the offender. But the message is still somewhat the same, isn't it? That there's a preference for white life over black life.
Unequal valuation
Right.
of human life.
Right.
Lauri, I know you got some thoughts about this.
Well, as you're talking, it's kind of, you think about, the issue here is the execution and the death penalty, but taking it a step back, I'm thinking about sometimes you hear it positioned as you either get the death penalty or you get life in prison or you have an insanity plea. And this is a little bit of what we talked about on the phone. Reagan repealed that Mental Health Systems Act in 81. What role do you think that played in how we see mental health issues and how that might have affected the influx of violent crimes?
Well,
that the crimes that would merit or warrant a death penalty option.
Really, that's really kind of hard to measure, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why. Most murder cases, okay, even those committed by people who are legally insane, do not end up as death penalty cases. Only a very small percentage, probably less than 2%, probably close to around 1% of all homicides get eventually tried as capital cases. And even there, a jury that returns a death penalty has no guarantee that that offender is going to be put to death.
True.
In Texas, we have a very high rate of people whose cases get overturned at the state level or at the United States Supreme Court level, and they never get executed. Is murder affected by people whose mental health is severely challenged? Oh, of course, absolutely. But there's lots of other factors too: access to guns, alcohol, lack of opportunity, high rates of compulsiveness, frustration. This all combines, and then you throw in.
Right.
We're going through a murder spree now nationwide. We're seeing murder rates climb.
After 2 decades of a decline.
Every bit of 2 decades, yeah. They've been going down for a long time, but not now. They're moving back upwards again. Let me tell a little story here. Obviously, I take a strong position against the death penalty. I think it's bad social policy. Okay, I don't think we ought to be executing anybody. I wouldn't have even executed Osama bin Laden. Okay, I just have a moral objection to it. I understand most people probably don't have that deep of an objection to it. That's why there's lots of other reasons besides the moral objection that the death penalty is wrong. I first stepped on death row when I was 18 years old. I had been asked to join a documentary team and go to Tucker Prison in Arkansas and film life on death row. There were 17 men in 1968 on death row. 5 of them were black men who had been sentenced to death. They hadn't killed anybody. They were black men who had raped white women, and they'd been given a death sentence for that. I was already opposed to the death penalty, and don't ask me why. No red light had ever flashed on, and said, this is the reason. I just always had been. But when you spend 4 days, long days with men on death row, and you get to know them, you get to realize that you're not dealing with some deranged chunk of humanity. Oftentimes you're dealing with individuals who, under states of all kinds of duress, frustration, drug addiction, and so forth, did extraordinarily irrational things. The guy I got to know best was a fellow named Lonnie B. Mitchell, Jr. His prison number was SK813. He was a senior man on Arkansas's death row at that time. And he had been convicted of rape and given a death sentence, and he thought he was going to die in the electric chair. The year after that documentary team of which I was a part was on death row, I grabbed a friend of mine, and the following Christmas we went back to Arkansas, the two of us, to see the guys on death row. I was just paying a social visit. The warden said, why don't you bring some books and some cigarettes? I said, okay. So I did, back on death row. Second day we were there, I came in and they said, warden has a big announcement. And the announcement turned out to be that Governor Winthrop Rockefeller, a Republican, okay, had commuted all, at that point, 15 death sentences. He wiped the slate clean. And when we went back the third day to see the guys, there was a birthday party of sorts. And these guys had been given back their lives. Right. Those kinds of experience, for a young college student, I was a freshman, that was pretty darn formative and convinced me that most of us are a lot better than the worst thing we ever did.
Well, and as you mentioned, there is that documented possibility, and in some cases it's been the case, that they just got it wrong, and that innocent people were not only convicted but executed for sure. Our guest is Professor Roger Barnes, one of the country's most accomplished sociologists, and we're delighted to have him on because all these themes are kind of what Radically Rational is all about. And one of the things, Lauri, I'd love for you to get really involved in this. One of the specific things I wanted to ask you, where is this anti-math and science bent coming from? I know that populist theme has always been out there to some extent, but there's a difference between ignoring math and science and hating math and science and considering math and science an evil. And that's what I'm seeing now. In other words, if science says it, there's a certain segment of the population, science said it, therefore it's a lie and I don't believe it.
It's wrong. I don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
Wait, and or using the umbrella term as science to reinterpret your opinion and calling it science. I've seen that too.
There's that too.
Your science is not the same as my science. I do believe in science. I believe in my science. I just don't believe in your science. Like, how did that happen? So back on your question, but that happens with numbers and science. You can be interpreted based on the person's personal opinion.
Well, and that, Lauri, is exactly right. And Raj is just another manifestation of this unprecedented polarism and tribalism that I have to disagree with you because you wear the wrong color jersey.
Right. And it is tribalism. And it's a kind of binary approach to life, which is overly simplistic. It also reflects the fact that some people have not been truly educated. They maybe have gotten a credential, but they haven't gotten an education. Because one of the things that happens when you get a real, authentic education is you can see what's scientific and what's not. You can make the determination of what is objectivity and what is partiality and bias. It's not that complicated. Okay? I don't know if this is a consequence of the fact that we've moved towards, well, there's the elites, and those are the people like me, who have graduate credentials and have gone to teach college and indoctrinate our college students. And then the others, I'm not sure, Paul, altogether that I know where that the origins of that lie. But you are right that that's in many ways what we're facing today. And I don't see how you combat it with anything except good education, facts, and speaking truth to people.
Yeah. And education, ultimately, as you indicated, that's learning the proper ways to think. And when I say proper ways to think, I don't mean proper opinions, I don't mean proper conclusions, but a rational pattern of thought that can lead to a supportable conclusion. And what I'm seeing, Lauri, and we've done this communication thing and media thing forever, is that the process here should be to independently, objectively gather facts and evidence in order to form premises for an argument that can lead to a rational conclusion. And what happens, Raj and Lauri, is the process becomes bass-ackwards. You start with the conclusion that you simply prefer and then cherry pick backwards from there.
Yeah, and then search for how can I justify where I am instead of, okay, let me take a journey and see where I arrive.
Right. No, that's exactly what basically makes up all of our conversations on and off the air, Paul, is the frustration around what happened to that process and why isn't that being taught? One of the things that you're going to laugh, but one of my conversations with Paul, Roger, recently, I said, you know what I think schools need to start teaching, and it should be a prerequisite before you're allowed to graduate, is a class and a course called complex emotional processing. And, I think complex rationality should be, or a complex ability to deduct objectivity or to develop objectivity should be something too, because somewhere along the lines, I think that I don't know where we lost it, because I really think that some people are absolutely capable of doing that, and then others clearly are not. And I don't know if it's by choice or if it's taught. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think a lot of people go through the process. Let me tell you exactly, Lauri. A lot of people go through higher education and don't get any better.
Right.
Their complex reasoning, their critical thinking skills, and their writing skills don't really improve.
Why is that?
Except by a fraction, by the tiniest of fractions, from when they are entering first-year students to when they're graduating seniors. Okay. Why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One of them is they're taking courses in disciplines where the discipline has a tradition of not demanding much from students. So they're not being forced to read, they're not being forced to write. And so whatever critical thinking skills they have are not being challenged or utilized. Okay? What we do know is that students in those disciplines, and I'm proud to say the social sciences is one of them, and the humanities is another, where students are routinely forced to read and to write a considerable amount every semester, guess what? They do improve in those skills of critical thinking and complex reasoning and mathematics. They do get better there. So it's a matter of, well, you've got to, create an environment where students do that. What that means is that gigantic universities, not like mine, okay, they're primarily research institutions. And, the teaching is not valued.
Right.
And so, and you put 400 students into a large class, you're not going to have them writing a lot of papers. You're not going to have them reading a lot of books. That's just not going to happen. I'm not saying that learning can't take place, but it's just not going to be the kind of learning experience that is so enriching that you're going to go from here to here in 4 or 5 or 6 years.
It's like exercising a muscle. You exercise it properly, you're going to get stronger.
Yeah. I think, I was just reading yesterday something that I thought was very, very interesting. And if I can, I just want to share it with you, with the two of you. It's by Nicholas Kristof, who I think is a really first-rate columnist. And he makes just a comment. He says, Greeks have higher high school graduation rates than we do. Chileans live longer. 15-year-olds in Russia, Poland, Latvia, and many other countries are better at math than their American counterparts. And one-fifth of American 15-year-olds cannot read at the level expected of a 10-year-old. So, we ask, well, how did we get to this point? We're surrounded by so much insanity and irrationality that is substituting for real, authentic political discourse. Well, look at that. Our institutions are failing us. Our educational institutions.
And if I said the reason for that is an historic, national, not just naivete, but we've kind of been reading our press clippings. I think there is a notion of what we think America is in terms of a leadership globally, intellectually, scientifically, and what we're really doing right now. So I do think that there's been a certain amount of, for lack of a better term, resting on our laurels, and I might even go so far as to describe it as hubris. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I think we buy into a lot of mantras. The mantra that we're number one, the mantra that we don't make mistakes, that we're an unchallenged superpower. This just goes on and on. And all of this is simply demonstrably untrue. We do not have the highest standard of living of any country in the world. Now, the very, very rich among us, okay, yeah, they're doing just well. But you don't judge a country by how well off the rich, the wealthy, the politically powerful are. You judge a country by how it treats its poor people, its people who are homeless, its people who are the victims of discrimination. It's by how it treats its prisoners, how it treats its people on death row. You judge a country by how it does with that. And, well, once again, America's not doing too well, is it? Right. When it comes to the judgment.
Yeah, and what's sad to me, Raj, and Lauri, you and I have talked about this a lot. A lot of people would hear the paragraph that you just spoke and heard it in isolation. Well, here's a guy who clearly hates America. No. If you love this country, what is real love about? Real love is trying to convey ideas and a constant presence and a constant positive presence in order to make that which you love better. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, nothing. That's exactly what it is, But if we want to just wrap ourselves in a cloak, which shuts off all information coming in, it shuts down critical thinking, drives people away from a world of books and intelligent magazines, not trash, not junk, and then we're going to have problems. And that kind of world is happening far too much. Kristof writes, 1/5 of all 15-year-olds can't read at a level expected of a 10-year-old.
And what do you think is going to happen to that society?
What do you think is going to happen is right. And so we started this conversation by talking about, what the Frenchman Durkheim called anomie, a kind of structural breakdown. Well, folks, there it is. These become the kinds of pieces of evidence of how that malaise, that social deregulation is affecting American society.
And Raj, I got to ask you this. We started this interview kind of jocularly with the idea of we're going to ask you a real specific question. How did we get here?
Yeah.
This is the other thing that I just don't understand. We have become Lauri, a mean society. And it's almost meanness for the sake of meanness. There was a really good phrase that was coined by Adam Serwer, writing in The Atlantic, who said, the cruelty is the point. The cruelty is not a byproduct, Raj and Lauri. The cruelty is the point.
Yeah.
How did we get there?
How did we get there?
Indeed.
Well, one thing is that we've maybe been that way for quite a long while. Don't forget, we committed genocide against our native peoples. We enslaved blacks as slaves, treated them as chattel, as property, and then when that broke down, enforced a whole series of segregation laws that kept blacks in third-class citizen status. Paul, maybe it's not just that we've come to cruelty is the point. There's much about this society that has been historically cruel for a long, long time.
Lauri, do you think it's been ramped up, though? And if you do you think social media has played any role, particularly in the sense that it makes people anonymous? And when you're not accountable and when you're anonymous, you can peg that meanness meter pretty quickly.
Well, what I think is so interesting is, you were talking about critical thinking and, being able to form an educated opinion about things and having healthy dialogue and all the things we've been talking about. We're living in a time where that should be easier than it's ever been. It should be so easy to find something out. Even the facts, the real true facts, Paul, we have them at our fingertips.
That's right.
Literally. Mm-hmm. And yet this constant availability of information and constant availability of each other on devices and constant ability to opinionate something and pontificate on something and be judgy and mean, it's brought out the worst in us. At least the people that are active on social media. I can't say everyone. I hate the generalization. We've all turned to whatever, but it's brought out the worst. And I don't know why that is, and I keep putting all of our questions on you, Roger, but why in a time where we have the ability to connect with loved ones and people we don't know and new people and neighbors and people in other countries and people from different beliefs and backgrounds, we have the ability to connect and become more cohesive and more understanding of each other. The opposite has happened.
Is it because, Lauri, we're too ethnocentric? We tend to think only about in terms of how things affect us and in our own society. We're not. Is it a lack of curiosity? Is it the absence of imagination? That we're just not curious any longer. It requires too much work, too much mental investment. I'd much rather just sit in front of the TV, or play with my computer.
Yeah, indicative of a lazy society at this point, and I think we have to be honest and forthright about that. That's not to say that it's a terminal condition. No. It can be reversed, but we better get used to it. This conversation is so fascinating. Joined by Dr. Roger Barnes from University of Incarnate Word, and oh, by the way, go Cardinals, and my eternal podcast partner, Lauri Pearson. I want to get, if I may, just a quick comment from both of you on this. Okay, facts exist. We started this thing called Radically Rational primarily to entertain. We want to have some fun. But we also want to say that facts really do exist, and we really do want to bring facts back into fashion. And this is what I'm seeing, and I am asking for kind of a summary paragraph here. Lying at least used to carry a stigma. Mm-hmm. There have always been liars, but what I would say is we had amateur liars before, and they've now been elevated to professional liars. Yeah. And we did have social mores that at least said lying's a bad thing, so it might halfway keep you between the ditches. So it had some kind of social and intellectual stigma. It has none right now, and we're at the point now where a lot of people feel if you ain't lying, you ain't trying.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I don't mean to just harp on this, but we've had 4 years where we had a habitual narcissistic liar in the White House. And I mean, the Washington Post was doing its best to keep track of how many lies Donald John Trump has told during the course of his presidency. And it numbered in the thousands, you know. And with what effect? Did he any condemnation by his own political party? Yeah. Did it cost him anything?
No price, no stigma.
Yeah. He's impeached twice, but he's not convicted. You know, so in essence, he walks away unscathed, you know, with this gigantic history of lying. Well, what kind of a model does that set for people? It says, if the president can lie, and
You're
it doesn't
totally
matter,
unconstrained.
then why the hell can't I lie? You know? I don't think it's far-fetched to think that kind of simplistic reasoning has occurred to some folks.
Lauri, is this as bad as people just jettisoning their consciences? And I'm not talking about it coming from any particular vector, any point on the compass or the spectrum. Is it because lying no longer carries any stigma, does that mean that you have totally disconnected your conscience?
I think you're lying to yourself first and foremost, the proverbial you or the royal you. I think lying is easy, my opinion, and I don't want to come across as completely just dissing social media, because like anything, it could be used for good or it could be used for evil.
Yeah.
Evil, not. But I think, like, look at social media, where you're lying. A lot of people are positioning themselves in a not so truthful light for social media. We all know the example of, and I won't name any names, and present company absolutely excluded, but people who, this is my husband of 20 years, here's to 20 more, I love you. When behind the scenes, they're miserable, they're at each other's throats 24/7. I hate that SOB. I mean, I've heard all the stories, and like, we're so conditioned to be like our own little starlets that we want the best face forward, even though it's a lie. There's no genuine anything that we're seeing, and we're all bombarded with social media and these images of each other and other people's lives that are absolutely not accurate. But you also can't come on social media and say, I'm having a real crap day today. You don't want to do that either, because then you're a bummer. Like, there are all these weird rules that people are living off of and allowing themselves to be dictated by, and then judging other people for, and there's jealousy and there's all this. I just think, my point being, truth, we don't really see it a lot. I'm not sure we recognize it because we don't see it. I'm not letting people off the hook with that, but I think we lie to ourselves about who we are and what we're doing today and how well we're doing tomorrow and what our goals are. I think we've gotten way off base because we're also entrenched with appearance, this whole Hollywood thing that we all have to have a piece of.
Yeah, and like you said, they're all unwritten rules. It's almost like baseball in that sense.
It's all developed on its own little thing that nobody ever, because if you'd have checked in with me, I'd have said, no, I want to know what's really going on in so-and-so's life. I want to know how she's doing today, but that's not I don't get to click on that. Okay, I see what her picture says, but how's she really doing? I want that button. I want to know. I want transparency. Because I think that would then we would all have real emotions to deal with.
Lauri, I'm just thinking right now. Maybe we can expand our line of radically rational merchandise to include a bumper sticker that says "Make lying bad again."
Right?
What do you think? I mean, I don't know about you. I'd plop down 2.5 for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I get you.
Okay, so fascinating conversation. Thanks to both of you and to everybody for listening right now. And Lauri, okay, of all the various points of view and all the various things that we have discussed over the last few minutes, what's the one thing that we know for sure? Just like the best dude ever. Okay, yes. I'm just so happy I got a chance to meet him.
Me too. I know. We've got to have him back, Paul.
We'll do that. And by the way, the idea that you were putting forward about teaching critical thinking skills and life skills. I promise you on all that's holy, that will be the theme of a future edition of Radically Rational. That's going to happen.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Raj, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
This has been wonderful. We would love to have you back. Thank all of you for listening to Radically Rational. We do want to invite you to our new flying saucer UFO website at radicallyrational.com. It's a lot of fun. A lot of people put a lot of work into this, and never forget that primarily what we're trying to do here, we're discussing some serious topics. We don't take ourselves real seriously, okay? We're primarily trying to entertain you. So we will look forward to our next edition of Radically Rational, the podcast. Again, we're bringing facts back into fashion. We're making simple sanity sexy again. And remember this, we're not crazy, but some of y'all are pretty sketchy. Until later.